Megan is Missing, 2011 horror movie that just recently went viral online. Let's talk about what a lot of people now are saying is one of the most disturbing movies of all time, and why did it take people 9 years to figure this out?
I was talking to this kind of cool guy, and he's gonna be there, so I thought I'd check him out.
Damn, all the hot girls in one place.
Yeah, where you're not.
I was at summer camp when I was 10.
You were 10 when you did it?
I'll just know. We'll know when the right guy comes along.
Hey, Josh.
Hey, cute girl. Ah.
Doesn't he look like Brad Pitt? Why don't you come on over here and play with me?
Yeah, in your dreams, you dork. So, alone at last.
Okay, so Megan is Missing is a found footage movie, but it's not a found footage movie in that annoying, why the hell are you still holding the camera kind of way. That, like the found footage genre, which blew up with the Blair Witch Project. Yes, I know the Blair Witch Project wasn't technically the first found footage movie, but it was the one that popularized it. Then Paranormal Activity turned it into a fad. But yeah, there are a lot of found footage movies, and almost all of them have that moment of, why are you still filming this? We're about to die. So Megan is Missing sidesteps that because it's one of those movies that's kind of a faux documentary. It's obviously not real. These are not real people. Although I think there was an online hoax where they were trying to claim this really happened, but it wasn't. Megan is Missing is based on true events about as much as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on true events, which is to say, a crime sort of like this happened once. That's about it. But yeah, it does that. So this is one of those movies that claims to be a compilation of, webcams, cell phone recordings, news reels, all that stuff, and apparently the killer's own personal camera at one point. And yeah, it's about these two girls, Megan and Amy, who are best friends, 13 and 14, but Megan is growing up a lot faster than her friend. And what that is, that's not creating a rift between them. It almost has made their bond stronger because the heart of this movie is the bond between the two girls. And that is kind of built around the fact that Megan has had a rough life. She was sexually abused multiple times as a child. Keep in mind, she's only 14, so she's had a lot happen to her already. Her stepfather's in jail because he abused her. Her mother, her birth mother, kind of hates her because of that, which is just awful. But I've heard of that kind of thing happening before. I was even in the Human Centipede Part 2, if anyone remembers that. That was kind of a character trait of the main character in that, is that he had been sexually abused by his dad, and then his mom resented him for getting his dad arrested. But yeah, so there's not a lot of plot here, so it's kind of hard to really discuss it in depth without just giving everything away. But basically, this is just a story about these two young girls who kind of had a very very strong bond, and it's being documented initially mostly through Amy's camera. She's got a new camera and she's kind of playing with it a lot, and she's still a very young girl. She's only a year younger than Megan, but yeah, and I remember this from when I was in school. Is you could have two kids in the same classroom, and one of them would barely know how to kiss someone, and the other one had already had a threesome. Like at this age, when puberty first starts hitting, is 100% who you hang out with and how involved your parents are as far as to how experienced you get and how soon. And that's a big part of what this director, Michael Goyle, was trying to do. So he was basically given free reign to do whatever he wanted, more or less, with this project and just given a budget. He was given a $35,000 budget, which is nothing. That is pennies. Like going back to the Blair Witch Project. The Blair Witch Project, 8 years earlier, had about that high of a budget. And keep in mind, the Blair Witch Project is three people alone in the woods for 85% of that movie. I think the original Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween from '78, had about a $35,000 budget. So by 2006, when this movie was filmed, that was nothing. That was pennies. That was insane. And it's impressive what he pulled off with that amount of money. Now, the one place this movie's budget really shows is that house party, but I'll talk more about that later. But generally, he was interested at the time in sexual predators online. A lot of people in the 2000s were worried about that. You had that show, To Catch a Predator, the meme, why don't you take a seat? Because that was what the host of the show would always say when they'd bust one of these assholes trying to convince some 13, 14-year-old to have sex with them. So a lot of people were really concerned about that, and that was kind of where he was coming from. Now, supposedly he based a lot of these characters and these interactions on his friends' kids. So I'm not sure exactly how he got these kids to be that candid with him, but that's what he said. And he said that, it can be kind of shocking hearing kids that young because by the time you're in your 40s, you've sort of forgotten that by 12, 13, you kind of already know a lot. You're not as innocent as people like to make it out to be. I mean, you're already picking up on these things. I mean, like as someone whose parents never stopped them from watching R-rated movies, I kind of knew a lot by the time I was like 8. But and I know that's not typical. A lot of people's parents will try and keep them from watching like really hard R stuff until they get at least a little bit older. Like the only movie I ever remember my parents trying to talk me out of watching was The Silence of the Lambs because they said I wouldn't like it, and I watched it anyway. But yeah, like I was watching Slumber Party Massacre and Friday the 13th and Hellraiser and Pet Cemetery, like when I was a little kid. But still, even the average 12-year-old isn't that ignorant, isn't that naive. They talk about it, they don't necessarily do it or understand it fully. But yeah, so this is pretty accurate to that, and I had completely forgotten that because like I said, I saw this movie when it first came out in 2011. This thing took 5 years to get released, so that would be rough. Like that would be spirit crushing to have your movie just sit for 5 years and never get released. So after 5 years, it finally got released, and I saw it. And a lot of people did. Okay, I'm not going to say a lot. A fair amount of people saw it. There was some fair buzz around this movie when it was first released. It was even in an issue of Fangoria, and I wish I still had all my old Fangorias because I could probably find that issue. I mean, I just have to look at the movie's release date and then go like a month or two earlier. But yeah, there was some buzz around it, but it just kind of dissipated. It was like there were so many of these extreme like torture movies coming out in the mid late 2000s that by 2011 it was kind of like meh. But I do remember this movie having an impact when it was released because, like I said, I'm pretty dead inside as far as this kind of thing goes. It's hard to shock me, and this movie did. I remember when I first saw it, this movie kind of shocked me a little bit. It's what I call a gut punch movie. It's a movie that you actually feel while you're watching it. It's not just, okay, this is an intense situation. This would suck if it happened to me. No, this is like, damn. Like, you just kind of go, wow. And part of the reason for that is that this thing takes so long to get to the horror element. You almost feel like you're watching a Lifetime movie or something because the whole first half of this movie is purely just these kids and their lives, and it obviously foreshadows right at the beginning that these two girls are going to get abducted. But even to that end, you don't. You can be abducted in a movie, and the worst thing that happens is someone shoves you into a van, and then no one ever sees you again. And Michael Goya, the director, I believe he was also the writer. He certainly had something to do with the story, at least. Has said that he wanted to show in graphic detail with no cutaways what could be explained in a news report in 3 seconds. Girl was raped and tortured and found in a shallow grave. That's it. That doesn't really tell you. That's not painting a picture for you. This movie rubs your face in it. Now it's not quite as on camera as you might think, and Michael Goya might have just not been as aware of the horror genre as he thought he was, because there are movies that go way further than this. Speaking of gut punch movies, talking about something like Funny Games, or you want to go real deep down the rabbit hole, August Underground's Mortem, or The Bunny Game, even the first two Human Centipedes, not so much the third one, which was just stupid. Even all the way back to classics like House on the Edge of the Park, Cannibal Holocaust, The Last House on the Left, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, some foreign flicks like The Untold Story, or Audition, which actually reminds me of the structure of this movie, because Audition is a brilliant Japanese movie from, I believe, 99. Somewhere around 99 to 2002, somewhere in that area. And it's my favorite Takashi Miike movie, and it's an amazing movie, and there's no horror elements to speak of in the first half of this movie. But then it is brutal and insane in the second half, and it is so effective. That's what Megan is Missing has, is that it lulls you into thinking that you're just watching a drama. Maybe you could call it a mystery or a thriller, but like, so much of the first chunk of this movie is just kids talking dirty. And I mean, these kids are all in their late teens by the time this is filming, but they're playing early teens, and it sells for the most part. There's that one guy, the drug dealer guy, who looks like he's older than me, but I think that was intentional. I think he was supposed to be one of those sleazy ass guys that hangs out with little adolescent girls because he can't get laid by women his own age. Because he's obviously like, hey, if you come over, I give you some cocaine. Like, stranger danger and shit. But, aside from that, they all look pretty much age appropriate. The female lead, not Megan, but the other one, I think was 17 at the time this was filmed. and I could not find anything about the age of the actress who played Megan. It is a guarded secret. All the promotional material, everything about her online does not say. I'm just going to take a wild guess and say she's a hair older than the other actress. Neither of them had much of a resume behind them. They did a few tiny things before this and a few tiny things after this. So no one involved in this movie, as far as an acting, really went on to do very much else. The director did do one other feature, a movie called Mary with Gary Oldman. That was a thriller set on a boat, and I have heard it sucked, and I never got around to watching it. So once you establish Megan and her friend's relationship, which does sell, the two actresses do have a good chemistry, a good rapport. They're not, I mean, these aren't brilliant actresses, but this is one of those movies that's smart enough to know that it can't afford top tier acting, so instead it kind of just cast actors that seem like the people. You know, like when you watch the Friday the 13th movies or something, or the Paranormal Activity movies, you kind of are just watching people that are very similar to the characters they're playing, so they don't really have to act that much. So even though they might not land a line here and there, they might seem a little wooden occasionally, they're overall very believable in these roles. I have a couple complaints about the actress that played Amy, but a couple scenes where she just didn't quite sell it. But overall, she's good in it. They're both fine. So we follow these two as they, we establish their friendship. We establish Megan's history of abuse. We establish that that's kind of messed up her self-esteem a bit. That she kind of will just go along with a guy more or less just because she's been damaged by these things that have been done to her. And she really needs therapy, obviously. But her mom's a piece of shit and isn't raising her. Isn't raising her. Like, her mom just screams at her. That's it. She's not raising her. You know, like that line in Seven, which they mentioned Seven in this movie. I completely forgot that. They mentioned Brad Pitt a few times in this movie, actually. But it's easier to beat a child than raise it. Like, it's not, raising a child is not screaming, "Put your shit away, you stupid little bit." Like, no, that's just going to create resentment and conflict. You actually have to raise a kid. And her mom's not raising her, and she doesn't have a father. Amy, on the other hand, has, good upper middle class parents. They have a nice big house. And she's more or less all right. Now, she does go along to a party with Megan at one point and gets hammered, which probably means she had half of one beer, because this is a tiny girl, and it's obvious that she probably never drank before in her life. And I had completely forgotten this, that at that party, and the party looks cheap, by the way. That's the one place where this movie's budget really shows, is that this is supposed to be like this badass rager party, and it looks like the house doesn't even look furnished, and it looks like they just bought three $30 strobe lights from Spencer's and were like, "Party!" Yeah. There's a lot of people there, at least. At least it wasn't one of those movies where there's 5 people at the party and they're trying to pretend that this is normal. But she gets hammered at the party and she's obviously sick, and Megan isn't really paying attention to her. And I had forgotten. It's like, I remember she puked at the party, but I did not remember she puked directly onto 2 girls that were making out at the party. That was funny. I legit had forgotten that. There's this one of the supporting characters, one of Megan's friends, that hates Amy as bisexual, and she obviously has a crush on Megan, and it's not reciprocated, and that's kind of pissing her off. I don't really know why they threw that little subplot in there, but in the 2000s, it was actually very common to have a lesbian subplot in a horror movie, so I guess they were just going with the flow. But yeah, so they go to this party, and then Megan gets hooked up with this guy named Josh online, and he's, handsome, blonde, surfer guy, talks a good game, and he claims his webcam is broken, so he can only send her pictures while she's on the webcam talking to him. And she's very flirty with him right off the bat. This is a girl that would be classified as easy, and I'm not slut-shaming, I don't care, just, she is. Like, this is the type of girl you do not have to work hard with to sleep with. And they make plans to meet, but then he blows her off. And then he kind of says, "Oh, this and that, and this and that, and this and that, but, maybe we can meet after you see this movie." And so she goes along with it, and it's broad daylight too. But she goes behind this store and is basically just drug off, and that's captured on a security camera footage of this grainy figure just pulling her off. And was it Josh? And the Amy tells the cops like she was supposed to be meeting this guy, and she claims that she doesn't know anything. But then she gets a message from Josh. And this is actually really inaccurate. When it's minors like this, they would not have released her name, and they sure as shit wouldn't have put her all over the news. Like, they have her on the news, like, camera shoved in her face, and one of the anchors actually says, "Do you think your life is in danger?" Yeah, they don't, they just don't. Like, it wouldn't have happened, but whatever. It's a movie. So her name gets put out there. Josh knows she's informing on him, so he messages her and tells her that he's gonna, basically if she doesn't shut her mouth, that he's gonna kill her and her family. And this is one of the places where I kind of do have to criticize the actress, because the actress's response to being threatened directly by a person she's never seen the face of after her best friend has disappeared is like the response I imagine a girl would give if a guy had sent her a dick pic that she didn't want. It's just like, and she does that again later when she's talking about Megan and she's starting to accept that she may be dead. It's just like, they all think she's dead. Maybe I do too. Didn't really land that line. But overall, it's fine. But then, I said Amy has good parents. Like, she has loving parents. She doesn't necessarily have good parents, though, because they do nothing after her friend is kidnapped to discourage her from taking long ass walks in the woods by herself. And she gets abducted, too. And then we see in very graphic detail what happens to her during her abduction. So this is loosely inspired by a true story. It was an incident where a guy named Ward Weaver, he abducted two best friends that were acquaintances of his daughter within I think 2 months of each other. The first one he killed and he buried in his backyard, then poured a concrete slab over it with his son's help, and he told him that he was thinking of putting in a jacuzzi. And then he got the second one shortly thereafter. And this guy was a straight up evil sexual predator type, because shortly after that, he tried to rape his son's girlfriend, and his son reported on him and said that he suspected him of the other two girls' deaths too. Cops investigated. They found everything. This guy was an idiot. And the guy was also Ward Weaver was definitely one of the types who wanted to be caught, because he even went on the news and said he thought the police considered him a suspect. This was before the police knew anything about the guy. So, and I actually think that's referenced in Megan is Missing. So, when they do the reenactment of Megan's abduction, when that awful television series, My Child is Missing, is doing that just poor taste reenactment of the crime, the guy playing Josh in that scene, the actor in that reenactment, is the actual actor that plays Josh in the movie too. So they're sort of doing a reference to Ward Weaver giving an interview, putting his face all over the news when he's actually the culprit. Now I'm not sure the movie necessarily wants us to believe that this actor in the reenactment is also the killer, especially given that he has a different accent. But it is interesting that they made that choice. Now it's possible that the guy playing Josh just said, "Hey, I'd really like my face to be on camera. I know that you said the villain's never going to be seen, and the villain is never seen in this movie." But I'd like to have some FaceTime somewhere, so they just kind of gave him this little throwaway role. I don't know. I guess that's kind of left up to the fan to decide. Do you think that actor was the person that was actually abducting these girls or not? Because there's no way to disprove it. You never see his face, and it kind of does look like his body type in the security camera footage. Now, that would be one hell of a coincidence if they hired an actor who had actually abducted the girls to play the abductor. But regardless. So, yeah, like I said, very, very loosely based on an actual incident. Another actual incident that was unrelated to that is when Megan's pictures show up online. The pictures of her in the tied up and bleeding. That also happened. Is a girl had been abducted, and she was pictures of her eventually popped up on some dark web fetish site, and that was one of the ways the cops that was a big lead for the cops, was just stumbling across these photos of this missing girl. And but that wasn't Ward Weaver. That was a separate incident. And the actress who played Megan, in doing her research, wanted to see the pictures and deeply regretted it afterward. I have no interest in seeing those pictures, so I have not done any research on that. But I'm sure they're out there if you wanted to find them. So yeah, this movie is effective, and a big part of the reason it's effective is because it's so slow getting. It's not slow. It's not boring, but it's very much taking its time in getting to the horror elements. So when it gets there, you don't really expect it to go as hard as it does. You don't expect to flat out, and heavy spoilers from here on out, heavy spoilers. You don't flat out watch Amy be raped. And she's a virgin too, like you see her bleeding all over the place. And I actually misremembered that, because I remember the actress not really selling that scene, and maybe I was just too young to realize that the reason she stopped struggling is because she's clearly in deep shock. But yeah, you don't really expect her to be raped. You don't really expect to see her humiliated in the way she is. And that reveal, man, when they see Megan's corpse, that is one of the most shocking reveals I've ever seen. I'm going to give this movie straight up props on that, because When he opens the barrel and Megan's decaying corpse is in there, that's shocking. Like that is legit one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in any movie. It's just like, God damn, I was not expecting that. And it's gross and it's believable. It's good makeup effects. You only see it for like a second, so your mind really fills in some blanks on that one too. It's harsh. And then the idea of shoving this girl in the container with her decaying dead best friend's body is awful too. Now I am gonna call bullshit on her being able to continue begging for her life like hours after she's been put in this barrel. First off, because I think she would have suffocated. Like corpses become toxic. Like there's whenever you watch movies like where they're dumping bodies into a big pit and covering with dirt and stuff. That's because corpses become toxic. You can't. I think she would have probably suffocated to death really quickly, and I also don't think she would have had the psychological fortitude. I think it would have driven her insane. I think she would have snapped. I think she would have been full blown hysterical. So those are kind of the only real complaints I have about the movie. Aside from that, this is an effective movie. It's not really a movie that I think has a lot of. It's not a movie that I think has a lot of rewatchability. It's not something that I would want on DVD because I'm a big solid media collector. It's not something I really want on DVD. I didn't necessarily. It's very possible I'll never watch this movie again. It's just it's an effective movie, but it's not necessarily a very much fun to watch. And gorehounds will probably be a little disturbed by the content, but it's not gory by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, there's very little on-screen violence. It's more just the idea of what happened. And I think that's why this movie is most effective for parents and teenage girls because it's really a nightmare scenario for both of them. I mean, as far as a parent goes, I don't think you can imagine much worse happening to your kid. And the thing is that there's not a lot that could have been done to stop this because it's broad daylight. Unless you just watch your kids 24/7, this is just one of those things that if it's gonna happen, it's kind of gonna happen. Like you could now, I do think that the girls should have been, particularly Amy, should have been given a little bit more safety instructions, and they probably should have been given like maybe pepper spray if they're going to be walking around all by themselves so much. But anyway, it's an effective flick. It's a gut punch movie. It falls definitely for me in that category with like a Serbian film or Funny Games or August Underground's Mortem or The Untold Story. Like it hits you pretty hard, but it's not necessarily that much fun to watch. So I don't know that I necessarily revisit it as opposed to something like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer or The Last House on the Left or Cannibal Holocaust or The Human Centipede, where I can rewatch those movies. Those movies, I get entertainment of them, even though they are really unsettling. I still find the movies fun to watch. Anyway, that's all I got on Megan is Missing. So Maniac Movies updates Wednesday and Friday, and maybe some random ones throughout the week if I see something I just feel like talking about. I try to do deep dives on movies when I do a full review on Wednesday or Friday. I don't know what the next one's going to be because I haven't decided yet. But see you.